An O'Reilly Auto Parts gift card is the perfect gift for that hard-to-buy-for person. Give the gift of convenience from O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dew, Chief Librarian Thomas Senna, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dew.
Thank you so much, Doug DeNance. It is great. No, it is fantastic to be here with you all this week inside the SNL Hall of Fame. Before you come on inside, I've got the door wide open for you here. Just take a look down at your feet. There's a mat there. Wipe them. The SNL Hall of Fame podcast is a weekly affair. Each episode, we take a deep dive into the career of a former cast member, host, musical guest, or writer and add them to the ballot for your consideration. That's how we play the game. It's really quite simple. You tune in, you listen to who we're nominating, and then you decide whether or not they belong inside the Hall of Fame by voting when voting opens. And voting will open, in this case, around the 11th of December. When we get into the roundtable discussions and whatnot. But for now, I won't waste your time with that information. I think we should get right into Matt's Minutia Minute because I'm excited about this week's episode. In fact, when I first launched this podcast, this was one of the pilot episodes I recorded. It was with Maddie Price, and it was covering Rosie Shuster. And that's what we're going to do again this week. We are going to have Thomas this time, though, sit in conversation with our friend Maddie Price and have a great conversation about Rosie Schuster and whether or not she belongs inside the SNL Hall of Fame. Like I said before, though, let me not give you any more information at this point, an information dump. Let's go right into Matt's information dump in his Minutia Minute Corner. Hey, Matt, are you excited about this one? Let's go.
Hey, Jamie, this is going to be a fun one. I am so excited. I grew up watching her dad on TV.
Me too.
To his old radio programs.
Yeah.
Rosie Schuster is a comedy icon from a family of comedy icons responsible for a lot of things I love.
Okay. Tell me about them.
Hey, Rosie Schuster, bit of a mystery, height unknown, born June 19th, 1950.
Whoa, no height.
Rosie was born and raised in my town of Toronto. She is the child of Canadian comedy royalty Frank Schuster, for whom there is a Toronto street named after, and is one of my earliest comedy memories. That said, she's not just the child of comedy royalty. She's also the cousin of Joe Shuster. You know, the Joe Shuster, like the Superman Joe Shuster. Remember that Canadian Heritage Minute where, Lois says, find out what your cousin Frank thinks. Well, that was Frank Schuster of Wayne and Schuster, father of Rosie. Rosie was followed home by a strange little fellow during her junior high years named Lorne in order to meet her dad.
Huh.
And, really, for our American listeners, these dudes were serious comedy royalty. I mean, you had a teenager following another teenager home just in the hopes to meet her father. That's a little weird.
Yeah, I would agree.
Her Aunt Geraldine, this is my personal connection to the Schuster family, which I only found out about from my uncle last night. Her Aunt Geraldine Schuster went to Juilliard and, as part of her exams, played my grandfather's sonatina for piano as part of her exams. I did not know that. So technically, I am within 6 degrees of separation, not just from Rosie, but Frank and Joe Shuster.
Holy shit.
I am having a nerd fantasy come true right now.
And Lorne. You're close to Lorne, too.
Before moving south to start a little project close to our hearts, she and Lorne started on the CBC with a show called Heart and Lorne, where they first worked with Dan and Gilda. They followed this by a stint in LA writing for the Lily Tomlin Show.
Right. I remember that. Okay.
After leaving SNL, she wrote for Broadway, including a project for Gilda called Gilda Live. That was at the Winter Garden Theater. She co-wrote that along with Michael O'Donoghue, Marilyn Miller, Alan Zwiebel, and Annie Beats. The production was directed by one of the founding members of Second City, improv innovator and Oscar-winning director, Mike Nichols.
Wow.
She produced a 3-volume series for the CBC called Wayne and Rosie Schuster's Legacy Series, along with writing several scripts for MGM, Warner Brothers, and Orion. She has written for Bob and Margaret, a very weird little animated Canadian TV series about British expats, one of whom is a podiatrist. She also wrote for The Larry Sanders Show, Carol and Company, and the Superman 50th Anniversary Special. She has a small part in the Blues Brothers as the waitress, and is an inductee into another prestigious museum, the Museum of Broadcasting.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was great work, as always. What do you say we take it downstairs now and go and listen to our friends Maddie Price in conversation with our very own Thomas Senna.
Wonderful, Jamie and Matt. We appreciate you as always. And today we are talking about, we're actually going to go a little blast from the past. We're going to go to the original seasons, kind of where it all started, the genesis of Saturday Night Live. Somebody who was there, basically, I'm sure she saw firsthand the beginning, the deliberations, how the show was created. Of course, we're talking about Rosie Shuster today on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. And with me to discuss Rosie Shuster is somebody who's been here before. I believe this is Maddie Price's 4th time on the SNL Hall of Fame. And so Maddie's been a guest with us for Paul Simon, Candice Bergen, and Gilda Radner. So this era of SNL, definitely in his wheelhouse. So I'm really happy that Maddie's able to join us. Maddie, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. That was a super nice way of saying that I'm very old, which I really appreciate. The early seasons are well in his wheelhouse, as
he's
they
the
say.
point person for the genesis, for the old stuff, for the
yeah, sure, yeah. Look, you know what? I'm going to take somebody new next time. You send me. I'll talk about. All right,
so we'll go early '80s then. Well, I'll send you something from the early '80s.
Give me I'll do a Punky Johnson episode.
I don't
care anymore.
All right, no, so Maddie wants everybody to know that he's not just his wheelhouse isn't just
I'm not dead.
Older SNL, no, but he's very informed and big fan of older SNL. This is we didn't do this on purpose. I swear, it's just
I know. And you know what? That's okay. These are all great seasons, and I especially do love looking at where this show kind of started. And Rosie Shuster is sort of we'll see kind of how this episode comes out, but I do think it's like sort of an important link in the chain of like what makes SNL for many reasons. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about it for sure.
Yeah, and if you want to hear Maddie talk about current day SNL, he has been a panelist on our roundtable episodes where he gets to give his opinions on like more current cast members and hosts and everything like that. So he's versatile, but we really appreciate him again being our old person to come here and reminisce about the late 70s with us. So thank you, Maddie, so much. So you joined us actually to talk about, this is interesting to me. So you talked about a musical guest, a host, a cast member, and now a writer. So we actually get to get your take on like the different aspects.
Yeah, so I've
well.
hit for the cycle here.
Yeah, the cycle.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you might be the first one. I don't know that Kirsten Turnbull, though she is a 5-timer, I don't know that she's hit for the cycle. So congratulations.
I'll take
on
it.
that. Your certificate will be in the mail. And talking about writers is probably a little trickier because we're not as involved in seeing the process of a sketch. We just see the results, so it's hard to get like a perfect read on their exact contributions. But Rosie Schuster was definitely an important figure in SNL history and in comedy. And in fact, she comes from an entertainment family, right, Maddie?
Yeah, so she is from Toronto, which is where Lorne Lipowitz, née Michaels, was also from. And in fact, they were married through pretty much the entire original run of the show. Their relationship ended, or they at least got, their marriage ended kind of right around the time the original run of the show ended. But they had known each other much longer. She is, like I said, she's a Torontonian and does come from a fairly well-known, at least in Canada, fairly well-known entertainment family, the Schusters. People in the U.S. would know her father, Frank Schuster, if they were watching The Ed Sullivan Show. So Frank Schuster and Johnny Wayne were a comedy duo, and they were specifically a sketch duo. They were not a comedy team like Bob and Ray. They wrote sketches and performed them. They had actually like a bit of a little repertory company with them, Sylvia Lennox and a few other really great performers. And they, in fact, set a record. They were guests on the Ed Sullivan Show more times than any other act. And their sketches were great, and they were very much of their time, kind of the late 50s, early 60s. They were very literary kind of sketches. So they wrote, like, their most famous sketches are like they wrote a sketch about the death of Julius Caesar that's like a simultaneous sort of takeoff on Shakespearean kind of stuff, but also really poking fun at like a lot of intricate jokes about Latin and stuff like that. Kind of the most famous joke that they wrote was they did Julius Caesar as like a murder mystery, like almost like a Columbo murder mystery where he's investigating who killed Julius Caesar. And so it's like a hard-boiled detective slant on Julius Caesar, and he comes into a bar and he says, "Give me a Martinez." And the bartender says, "Don't you mean a martini?" And he says, "Well, if I wanted to, I'd have ordered two." And it's like that's the kinds of jokes that they wrote. These very nerdy, you had to have been to school and taken Latin for that joke to kind of hit you the right way, right? Yeah. They wrote a Shakespearean baseball sketch. They wrote they did a lot of this kind of crossover stuff where there was like a higher education element to it that kind of powered through the comedy and made it work.
We saw a lot of that type of humor, like, in British, it's kind of like British humor. And we saw a lot of that seep into like Canada, and SCTV had elements of that, but it's almost like strikes me as very British.
What they don't have is that Monty Python kind of anarchy irreverence to it. It's much more, I think Goon Show is probably like a good example, but even still, like, I think what the Brits had was they're a little meaner, and these guys are a little more Canadian, which is why Ed Sullivan loved them. I think they're just like pretty harmless, fun. And they went on to kind of repackage those sketches as sort of television specials in Canada. So, Wayne and Schuster are like about as famously Canadian comedians as you could get. And Rosie, which is how her friends would pronounce it, grew up in Forest Hill, went to Forest Hill High School, which is where my mother went to high school a couple of years before her, and where Lorne Michaels, who was Lorne Lipowitz at the time, also went to high school a couple of years, sort of concurrently with my mom. He's a couple of years older than her. Oh, he was born in 44. My mother was born in 46, and Rosie was born in 50. So the way the story goes is that because Frank Schuster was this like huge comedy figure, and because Lorne knew that his daughter went to the school and was much younger, like she would have been sort of like a grade 9, 10 person when he was kind of in his final year of high school, but he followed her home because he wanted to meet her dad. He just was, I think he was a bit of a comedy. I think the one thing about SNL is that Lorne and most of those guys they're kind of comedy nerds, right? Mm. And before that was really a thing. And so I think my guess is that the relationship started because he just wanted to meet her father and just was hanging out with her. And she was like much younger than him, right? So I don't think it would have started as necessarily like a romantic thing.
He was just trying to network. Like, you saw Lorne's networking skills even at that age. He was trying to network with Rosie and meet some celebrities, meet some comedy heroes of his.
I mean, that is essentially the same story as Judd Apatow in terms of like being a kid who just loves comedy and wants to go meet all these heroes. Like, so I guess like at some point that blossomed into a romantic relationship. They were married in 1971, and they were not just married, they worked together almost right from the start. Again, probably no surprise to people listening to this show, but the kind of predecessor to SNL is a Canadian sketch comedy show called the Heart and Lorne Terrific Hour, which Lorne was the co-producer or co-creator of with a Canadian writer, Hart Pomerantz. And like to further complicate all of these relationships, my father was actually a semi-regular on that show. My father's best friend was one of the writers on the show, Alan Gordon, along with Rosie was a writer on the show. So was Hart Pomerantz. So was his younger brother, Earl Pomerantz, who really was like really good friends with both my parents. They went to university together. Earl went on to write probably some of the most famous sitcom episodes ever. He created a show called Best of the West, which is like a real cult sitcom classic. He also wrote the Goldfish episode of The Cosby Show. He wrote really famous sitcom. He wrote Cheers episodes. He wrote, like, if it was like a big show in the 80s and 90s, he was the executive producer of Major Dad. He created that show. Like, lots of people who were kind of around at the time then went on to like more stuff. Lorne and Rosie took that to the States and started, and became sort of the nucleus of SNL, I guess.
Yeah, and both of them were involved a little bit in Laugh-In as well. I know Rosie was kind of guest writer. I don't know if she was officially credited on
was
Laugh-In.
she? Okay. I know that they did work with Lily Tomlin too, right? In there where they were producing some of her specials.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I tried to get a sense, my dad was just a performer, so he didn't really have a sense of the writer's room. But one thing, I have seen a few episodes of Heart and Lorne Terrific Hour, and there are a number of sketches that are like a couple just talking about something in bed. And I feel like that's a real trademark kind of sketch that then they did quite a lot of those on SNL too. And then on top of that, my mom remembered her from high school. And I said, well, what was she like? And she said, oh, well, first of all, she was super pretty and she was not sort of cliquey or stuck up about it. She was like a super popular girl just because she was nice, which I thought was like very indicative of like why they could get people to work with them, right?
Yeah.
They weren't fake. I think Lorne Michaels is a lot of things, but I don't think he's, in disingenuous or whatever. Like, I think he's not a slick producer guy. He's like, he actually means it.
Exactly. He never seemed, I don't know, I never got the impression, especially in the 70s, that he was too much of a hard ass, especially at the beginning. It almost seemed like he was really good about making friends and getting people to trust him, especially like they trusted him when Johnny Carson said, you can't air my reruns anymore. NBC trusted Lorne and Dick Ebersol, but they trusted Lorne to be part of that process, and he was just a young Canadian, and he was charming enough and savvy enough to have people trust him. I think that's always been a gift of his, and it sounds like Rosie was cut from similar cloth.
Yeah, and I think, like, we can't know these people. We only know their work, and even then, like you said, with writers, it's very hard to know. In an active writer's room where there's a dozen or more people and they're all pitching at, helping each other, it's never clear exactly who's responsible for what. But I do think it's not like a crazy leap to say she was probably like a nice person who was easy, nice to work with and like not a terrible kind of, difficult person to be with. She seems to have partnered up with a lot of different people, including, primarily Ann Beats, I think, in the beginning. It's like they seem to be like partners. And nobody has a bad word to say about Ann Beats. Jeez. Like, must have been okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that was kind of my little voyage of discovery about her just on a personal side. And then I started looking at the sketches, obviously.
Leading up to this episode, we had a chance to revisit a lot of Rosie Schuster's sketches, whether she was principal writer or you said she teamed up a lot with various folks. Ann Beats, Meryl and Suzanne Miller, she teamed up with a bit here and there. So just kind of revisiting stuff, like how would you describe Rosie's comedic voice and point of view? Like, and maybe how did that fit in with SNL and what they were trying to do around that time?
I was trying to look for that because I think it's always interesting to try to, and again, you don't know what little bits and bobs people threw into sketches. But if you look at the ones that she is sort of credited for, the major ones really are, at least from the original run, are the Nerds. That's kind of the biggest sketch that seems like she has the most ownership of it.
What a becoming house coat, Mrs. Loopner.
Oh, flattery will get you everywhere, Todd. You kid must be starving. Let me get you some miniature marshmallows. Thank
you, Mrs. Loopner.
Now, which one of you is the new president of the chess club? Oh, Bob, they don't pick till Friday.
And then the Uncle Roy, Buck Henry sketches. They're kind of the major ones from that era. And then there's some other ones that you asked me to look at, which I also think are really interesting. But the thing about those sketches, especially the Nerds, is they have a kind of sweetness to them. And the sketches are about regular people. They're not really high concept sketch ideas. I don't see her name being attached to a lot of fake ads or there's not a lot of her stuff doesn't seem to need to be satire. It's character stuff. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That feels like what she's contributing is, there's SNL is a lot of different things. It has a lot of different strengths. Her strengths are not on the Weekend Update, Lampoon, the day's events side of it. And they're not necessarily on the take something and make it ridiculous and stretched out and stupid and goofy. They really feel more like, hey, people are funny, and when we can make them interact, they can be funny together. So I think that, there's like a kind of a humanism to her stuff that I think, and she's not the only one that I think can do that, but I think seems to do it extremely well.
Yeah, I agree. That was definitely evident with the Nerds. You mentioned Uncle Roy, which, two almost diametrically opposed kind of
two sides of the same coin,
things,
baby.
But it's slice of life in different sorts of ways. Definitely
likes putting children in peril. She really cackles at the idea of especially little girls being sexually in danger. She thinks that's really funny to play around with, and it's stuff you watch those Uncle Roy sketches. You cannot imagine somebody doing those sketches today. Impossible, right? Yeah. And they're really funny, and they're really really deaf in terms of what real victims of that kind of stuff might be going through. But the idea that she's able to sort of be, she's outrageous, but within the sort of confines of character outrageousness, as opposed to conceptual outrageousness.
Yeah, and with that Uncle Roy sketch, of course, I don't know, a lot of people listening don't need a reminder of what the Uncle Roy sketches were, but Buck Henry played a character named Uncle Roy who was babysitting. Who
is not their uncle.
Nieces. It's not, Uncle Roy in quotes, because he's just
he's just some friend
family
of their
friend.
Moms.
Yeah, who's babysitting the two little girls played by Lorraine and Gilda, and he has, quite frankly, terrible thoughts about and motives and intentions, and you can see that play out. But I've heard Rosie explain her point of view as far as writing these sketches. And what she said was, she explained the sketches as being okay because they don't have a victim. She said they don't have a victim. Everything bad happening is just in Uncle Roy's mind. Rosie said this. But the children love Uncle Roy so much.
Yeah, it's very clear that he would never actually harm those children.
Yeah.
But he's not going to actually put them in any harm. And in fact, everything he's doing, they think is really fun.
Mm-hmm.
From their point of view, it's all hilarious and a great time for little girls. They're all playing pretend.
Yeah, and they did at the end. I think it was maybe the final Uncle Roy that they did. Jane plays the mom and thanks Roy for watching them. And she says something to the effect of,
"It's a shame every family can't have an Uncle Roy. You're one in a million."
And in her mind, it's like she meant there's not many people like you out there who are so willing to help.
He turns to the camera and says,
"Oh, there's more of me than you might suspect."
I think those sketches are great, but I also agree with you that they thread a very fine line in terms of why they're great.
Yeah. And I can understand if people don't love them either, because in those situations, sure, in this specific sketch, there's no victim. It's only things are only happening in Roy's mind. I can see why people wouldn't like it, though, because in those situations, there often is a victim. So they got to be cognizant of that. But that wasn't Rosie's. If you hear Rosie explain it, she had a more, I guess, innocent viewpoint of those sketches.
There's also always this thing of because the fact is that the Uncle Roys, the sort of family friends who come over, that they are statistically by far the more dangerous individuals in society, as opposed to that horrendous Jim Caviezel movie that came out this summer where it's supposed to be some international ring of criminals that are kidnapping children. That actually doesn't happen. Human trafficking and abuse doesn't happen with people, strangers that you don't know. It happens actually with people you know and trust implicitly.
Right.
So you could argue that by depicting it that way, using comedy to actually raise awareness of the fact that you can't just trust people on good faith, and sometimes people will seem nice, but in fact are not nice. And it's the question is, by depicting it, are you making it funny? Are you making it okay? Are you providing excuses for it? Are you softening it? Whatever. I don't know the answer to that. My feeling is those sketches don't make me think that that's good or okay. Yeah. It makes me think they're bad, but also makes me laugh at this sort of the same way you laugh at something that you're not supposed to do, like laughing at a funeral or something. You're laughing because you're not supposed to, and you know that it's bad.
Yeah, something else, another famous sketch that was actually, it might not seem like slice of life at first blush, but it was slice of life as far as Rosie is concerned, was the Fred Garvin male prostitute sketch.
You see, ma'am, when a VIP like yourself comes to Moline to do business, it's customary for the company to send a gal up to the room. Compliments of Great Lakes feed and grain. And, well, since you're a gal, the company sent me, Fred Garvin, male prostitute.
There's a story behind this. This was the one in season 4, which I always thought wonderful sketch. I always thought it was a recurring character. They only did this once.
Yeah.
It's like a one-off, one of the more famous and beloved one-off sketches, I think, in the original years. But this was actually based on a bit that she and Dan would do, Dan would do in their bedroom. He would jump on the bed and pose all funny and sexy and use that voice. He would put on that Fred Garvin affectation and talk to Rosie that way. And that would make her laugh so hard.
Oh, for sure.
And by the way, we didn't even mention that Rosie, after she and Lorne split up, that she dated Dan Aykroyd. So that was that's a footnote to this.
I don't want to necessarily one of the things about especially that original group is that they all wound up dating each other.
Sure.
Right? So people work together in very close quarters and things happen. And again, I think it's because she was a genuinely beautiful and appealing person, not because she was a conniving whatever. She's those relationships are probably born out of something legitimate. It seems like.
Yeah, definitely. So that's why I think that's just a footnote. But she was with Dan Aykroyd at a certain point, and this was something that he would do. You can imagine that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, because it's hilarious, right? And his little poses on the bed and stuff they're great, and coming up with a way to put that into a sketch and have it be funny is terrific. And again, that's a great example of a sketch that seems on the surface of it is totally silly and outrageous, but it's totally coming from a bunch of pretty solid character orientations. The character that Margot Kidder plays and the character that Fred Garvin character, they have dimensionality and depth to them, and way more than they need to have for a sketch like that. They could just be cutouts. But I kind of feel there's a whole backstory on Margot Kidder working for this farm implements company as an executive and the only female executive, and having to travel and be alone and away from her husband. And this sort of matter-of-fact thing of well, when executives travel, they get broads.
Yeah.
And you're a broad, so we sent me.
And these well-intentioned managerial types. She's well, we have a female executive. Let's trying to find a male prostitute.
Yeah. But also his relationship to the pimp and him trying to be a good prostitute and really taking and really having, having no aptitude for that work is just so great. He's like, it's such a, the reason you think you've seen a bunch of them is it's such a fully formed character that feels so three-dimensional that you're like, I must have seen him a bunch of times.
That's such a good point. And I love the self-awareness. Fred Garvin does have self-awareness because it's almost he's trying to reassure Margot Kidder's character that he is capable and he can please her and all of this stuff. So I just love the lengths that he's going to reassure her that he's a professional and that he knows what he's doing, satisfaction guaranteed, all of that. So yeah, you're right. Like this is such a fully formed, fleshed out character. That's why I feel exactly why I feel like it is a recurring character, even though it's not.
Yeah, he's got a great tagline right off the hop. It's very it's kind of got everything you want out of an SNL sketch, right?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we shouldn't gloss
beginning, middle, and end, which they don't always have.
It's hard to end a sketch, man. It's bonus points if they know how to end a sketch, but I don't detract points if they don't know how. It's just so hard to end a sketch. But this one actually, like, you're right, beginning, middle, and end. Just a classic from the early days, and Rosie was like a big part in that. I mean, she took a real life experience and fleshed out just a wonderful sketch. This is something that Rosie should be proud of. And we shouldn't gloss over the fact, too, we had mentioned that she was behind the nerd sketches, but they were beloved. There was at least 12 of them at least a dozen nerd sketches between seasons 3 and 5, those with Bill and Gilda. And they were super beloved. It tapped into something that
and Jane Curtin, who is the unsung hero of those sketches. Jane Curtin's mom in those is so great. Yeah, it's really interesting to watch those develop. I had never seen the original one where they're supposedly a band with Robert Klein, and the characters came up first as just generic nerds, and then I guess they realized that they could, that they wanted to know more about those characters. But what's really cool to me is you say they were beloved, but it's actually probably not until the 4th or 5th one.
That's
it's a very organic belovedness. They clearly are writing those sketches because they have affection for those people, all of them, and like the performers too. But like they really like that scenario and like the way they've constructed those characters. And so they keep writing the sketches, and it sort of takes a while, but eventually they get to the point where the minute they come out, the audience cheers the way they would cheer for other sort of other runners like Hans and Franz or Church Later or whatever. Like they have to earn it by just being good every time, right?
Yeah. And then and they established goodwill with the audience, and you could tell by the end, like there's a Nerds Nativity sketch, and there's not like a joke per second. There's like that sketch just kind of like fleshes out. There's a lot of setup. It's really is a kind of a long sketch, but it's almost by that point, it was like the second to last nerd sketch. By that point, it seems like they had so much goodwill with the audience that it was fine. Like they can just do a scene with the nerds and it doesn't have to be joke. And the audience is fine with it.
They also, I don't know if this is the only sketch to ever do this, but there's basically true continuity through all of the sketches.
Yeah, there's like a narrative.
There is an overarching narrative. If you watch them all, as I did today, characters recur, they come back, and they don't shy away from like acknowledging that. When they bring back the Michael Palin music teacher, like everything that happened in the previous Michael Palin music teacher sketch is still part of the continuity. It feels like they just would look at the last one and go, okay, where do we want to take them from here? But they didn't forget about it. Like I think a lot of other recurring sketches, they're totally episodic. I can't think of any, maybe the Coneheads, like I can't think of too many that were runners where like...
Yeah, the Coneheads had an overarching theme of like getting back home.
Right.
But I think you could watch each Coneheads individually and not necessarily notice a narrative.
On their own, but I think there's clearly in a line, like they clearly, if you have been watching them all, you get more out of it.
And I don't know, Maddie, if you noticed this, and this is coming from Rosie, she said that she thought it was funny that the interaction between Todd and Lisa was predicated on how Bill and Gilda were getting along in real life at the time. Because I think they
that's cool.
possibly were dating, and you had mentioned that back then a lot of them dated each other.
Predicated on Bill trying to make Gilda break.
Either making Gilda break, or sometimes there was frostiness between them if things weren't like great in real life. I don't know if you caught on to any of that, but Rosie says that she could notice that in those sketches.
In like how they would do it?
Yeah. Yeah, just how they interacted with each other. She could tell how, like, if Bill and Gilda weren't getting along that week, she could tell in the nerd sketch that they weren't. It was kind of fascinating. But she's so good at world building, Rosie. I mean, just judging by some of these examples, she's very good at building characters and building a world and establishing like narratives. And I think that's a real talent as a writer.
Yeah. Like I said, I think she's one of the few that really works from characters out as opposed to the other way around. And she doesn't. And she also, I mean, I guess we're going to talk about it, but she's sort of the one that developed the church lady Enid Strick into a concept for like, how do you take that? That was a character that Dana Carvey did in stand up. And so he had just had jokes that he would do, but he didn't have a frame to like hang the character on to make a sketch out of it. And I guess her role was to say, well, why don't you make it like a talk show? And then you can have people on and then you can sort of criticize them for not being, that you're so much more sanctimonious than they are. And that be your shtick. So you get to have a rotating group of people come on every week, kind of like be themselves. You can have real people and impressions, but you basically get to just like sit in judgment over every single person that comes on the show, which is a really good frame to hang that around. And so there's an example of taking a character that isn't coming from inside of her, but still like understanding how do I maximize this character and make it into something. I think it does always seem to come from, that sort of more human approach to stuff.
Yeah, I think Rosie is so synonymous with the first 5 seasons of SNL that a lot of people don't realize that she worked with Dana on these church lady sketches in season 12. And you're right, this was a Dana character. Before SNL, she helped flesh it out, and she has the perfect summation. Rosie does. I had found something where she talked about like her vision of the church lady, and this is just the perfect summation of what the church. She said the church lady would project her filthy erotomaniac imagination all over the poor hapless guest, whoever they were. She would basically verbally slime them with her own repressed garbage, and then she'd go to town shaming them. She had a black belt in shaming. And then she'd coyly suggest their behavior was the work of Satan. That's what Rosie said. That's exactly, that's how you describe the church lady sketches. That's the nugget that makes those work. She's repressed.
Like it's all progression. It's all projection.
Yep. It's all projection.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but she's right. Yeah. That's really smart.
First, we check in under a false name, probably Steve. All right. Then we slip a lewd into Jessie's wine, just to get her in the mood. Then we peel off Jessie's spandex pants and tube top. Then Jimmy has to explain how this has never happened to him before. How long does that take, Tammy? Excuse me.
Oh, I would say about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, so we have some more time here. So then Jimmy, a few more minutes. Yes, Jimmy preps the bed, and I guess Jessie preps Jimmy.
She helped develop this character. She was only involved really in season 12 of this character, but that was where the important stuff happened. That's where a lot of the character building happened. Of course, Dana fleshed it out so well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. After she left, it doesn't seem like she left Lorne on really bad terms. Like I said, I think they broke up, but I don't think they hate each other.
No, it didn't sound like it.
Again, I'm just guessing, but my guess is that he had this character and none of the writers who were already on the show had a take that they liked. And maybe Lorne talked to her about it and she said, oh, well, maybe I have a take on it. Like, it doesn't seem so formal. You know what I mean? It's more like, I can help you. I can probably write something. She worked on other people's material too. She worked on the It's Gary Shandling show also, which is another kind of fun thing that comes out of character, but also has like pretty outrageous stretches away from reality and stuff. And I think
definitely. And Larry Sanders too. So she knew Gary Shandling from there, and she worked a little bit on Larry Sanders, which was classic, wonderful show. One of my all-time favorite shows, honestly. So yeah, Rosie had a little hand in that. And I think we talked about a lot of her slice of life kind of points of view and sketches. And I have a few examples of she liked to kind of poke a little bit at like male ego and patriarchy and kind of things of that nature. She did have some satirical sensibility as far as that goes. Like when Lily Tomlin hosted an episode early in season 1, And it was basically just taking the piss out of the male ego and a commentary on chauvinism. It was the what they call hard hats. It was when actually it was Lily Tomlin teaching the female cast members how to catcall men who were scantily clad.
Now, when a cutie pie walks by, I want you to stretch your stuff, honey. When a cutie pie walks by, here's how you break the ice. Hey, beefcakes. Hey, beefcakes. Yeah, you. Come up here, baby. Do some squat jumps on this girder. Okay, I think I got him warmed up. You take over. Oh, hey, wait a second. Permit me, sweetheart.
Hey, Dreamboat, what's the matter? Smile isn't going to cost you anything.
No. Now, you should have had that memorized, Jane. You should have had that memorized.
Yes, they're all female construction workers.
Yes.
And construction worker school. And so she's like, well, now it's time to learn how to make men feel bad about themselves.
Yeah.
And yes, I agree. And I think the same thing with there's a mommy beer commercial that she did later on, which is the same idea of like basically just taking masculinity and showing it up for how ridiculous it is. You know, there's some other sketches. There's one that's like a sort of it's called Herstory, episodes of Herstory. And one of the ones that she wrote is about Freud being unnaturally aroused by his daughter, Anna. And like, I think she does have this thing where she's trying to point out that this fetish that men have for little girls and sort of very infantile behavior among women. There's another one called Gidget Gets Shock Therapy that's talking about how obnoxious that idea of grown women acting like little girls is. I think it's all kind of part of the same thing, which is her saying, this is ridiculous.
Bad Dolly! Don't hurt Dolly! Don't hurt Dolly, she's so cute. Bad Dolly, wee all over pretty dress. Oh, Bootsy, have to make Tinky too in pee-pee potty. Hello, Luffy. Hello, Bootsy. Binky needs to go to the little girls' room ever so badly.
That Gidget Goes to Shock Therapy was very much a heavy-handed, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing it, but it's very much heavy-handed in that regard. It was with Gilda Lorraine and Sissy Spacek was in that. It was basically like Jane comes on and identifies the three of them as grown women, so they're talking. So you think they're little girls talking to each other, but Jane comes on and says these are grown women, even though they presented children, and they labeled them as terminally cute. And she said, but there's a cure, and it's shock therapy, or it's called Gidget's disease.
Yes.
So they're taking donations to help find like this cure, to raise money for Gidget's disease. And that's totally a commentary on like the type of woman, I guess, who's terminally cute, who speaks in a cutesy voice, and then maybe the type of men who are attracted to that.
There was also a whole thing in the 70s in sort of men's magazines around women dressing as little girls, like dressing in little girl outfits and stuff, and whether that was okay or not. And there was a lot of talk about how damaging that was to kind of the women's movement and, you know, schoolgirl stuff and all of that kind of stuff. And I think all of that was kind of in the air in the culture. And I think the Jane Curtin part in that Gidget Shock Therapy thing is pretty much her directly speaking her own point of view, which is, this is ridiculous and obnoxious.
Really enough to make you want to puke your guts out.
And like, I don't think that's somehow her just going, well, this is what the character would say. Like, I think that seems like a direct statement from her, the writer.
Yeah, kind of a direct statement from Rosie. We know who wrote that sketch. It's almost like Rosie saying that's how she views this. And if Rosie was trying to poke at the male ego a little bit with these sketches, there's a good thing. It probably worked, because in that hard hat sketch that we were talking about, Belushi didn't want to do it because he said he felt objectified and he didn't want to parade around in short shorts and everything. So Dan Aykroyd actually took his place. That was originally going to be Belushi, but he didn't want to do it because he felt objectified. And I bet there was part of Rosie that pumped her fist and was like, all right, see? You see?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, do you feel objectified?
Is that so? Good. Yeah.
Yeah, because I have news for you. Yeah. It's also just an objectively hilarious sketch because Tomlin is so into it and she's so funny in it. And they're all great, I think. Like, that's a really good, like, it does. I mean, we've now come to the point where I think, you know, there's been lots of commentary on catcalling and stuff, but like, that feels like it was a bit ahead of its ahead of the curve. And
1975. Yeah.
Like quite nicely sort of sums up just how dehumanizing and shitty that behavior really is. And I like the fact that that sketch ends on a real down note where Dan Aykroyd's just crying. And like he's just destroyed. There's no redemption for him. It's not happy. He's just crying. And the final line of the sketch is, "Oh, come on, man. It's only school."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a really weird way to end the sketch, which is just to say like, yeah, this sucks. It's terrible. Stop doing this.
Yeah, but you don't feel sorry for him, especially if you're a woman who's been catcalled.
No,
like,
exactly.
I'm sure you don't feel sorry
that's
for
what
him.
I mean. It's not about him, getting to feel better about himself. It's like literally about how this behavior is destructive and makes people feel shitty.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we do it.
Yeah, that was an interesting point of view, especially in the mid 70s, for women to write comedy like that. She and Ann Beats were heavily involved in that sketch. Lily Tomlin, a comedy legend, heavily involved. So I thought that was like a nice, wonderful gem from those early seasons. There's a sketch in season 4 that's a kind of a rare Lorraine Newman led sketch. It's this child psychiatrist that I thought was interesting. Lorraine Newman plays a 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl who's also
she
a
is
psychiatrist.
a literal child psychologist, as in she's a psychologist who is a child. Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting point of view, and she actually does a good job of getting to the root of the problems that this child's having with their parents. I thought that was I thought that was super clever to cast Lorraine as an actual child to help this family through their problems, and she behaves childishly as well, but she also has some sense about her. And it's almost like Rosie's saying that children do have intuition in some ways too, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. Plus, I think Lorraine is the one that they had the longest relationship with of the cast members, because I think they picked Lorraine up first from the Groundlings, like when they were in Los Angeles working, doing the stuff.
I know Lorne and Ebersol were in LA crafting the show, so that does make sense. Lorraine would have been one of the first.
Yeah, and I feel like they write for her as well as anybody, because she didn't always get the best stuff to do, and they seem to understand how to use her really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the Gidget one too that we had referenced, Lorraine is heavily involved in that one too. So
yeah. And even she's in the almost, I guess, not quite the last, but one of the very last Nerds sketches, which is the one where Todd's running for student council.
Yes.
And she has a really good character in that. It's a really fully formed character. She's only in that one sketch, but she's like one of the other classmates at school. And I thought her performance in that Nerds, in that particular one, was really good.
Yeah, I thought she was good in that. And it would have been nice if, there were more folks like Ann Beats and Rosie Schuster who wanted to give Lorraine. I think Lorraine could have done so much more in those early seasons if people focused on her like a lot of times Rosie seemed to as well. So another check mark for Rosie is she actually wrote stuff to try to highlight a talented cast member who didn't always get lead roles.
I mean, a lot of her sketches have all the women on the show in them.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. Like, again, I think the writing that she does, not just for the two nerds, but the writing she does for the mom, for the Jane Curtin character, is incredibly good. It's incredibly smart.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about as far as Rosie's candidacy? Any sketches, characters?
No, like I said, I think what we won't ever know is what kind of stuff did she lob into other people's sketches that made them better, which I'm sure she did. Right. But we can't, it's hard to ascribe. So it's hard to know the full measure of a person in that way, other than to say, there's only a core group of maybe like 8 or 9 people that really created that show from a writer's perspective. And she is one of them. And I think that's important. And I think like we can talk about the sketches that she is attributed to, but just the fact that she was there with that group, one of the only 2 women writers in that group, surrounded by a sea of men, and yet to a great degree the first 5 seasons of SNL are pretty balanced with male and female kind of points of view and performances and performers, and I think she's a part of that, right? So I think there's some heavy lifting going on there.
So you don't think voters should just dismiss Rosie Schuster when it comes time to cast their ballots, right?
No,
give her a chance.
No, she's absolutely worth consideration. I think the great thing about that show is it's so big and it's so expansive and it's got room for a lot of people to have really contributed. And I think that this is as strong a contribution as anyone has. So yeah, I would have no reservations about her getting into the hall. I think she's well deserving.
So there's that. That was Maddie Price in conversation with Thomas Senna discussing the nomination of Rosie Shuster to the SNL Hall of Fame. Will Rosie pass muster? I don't know. It seems to me thus far, results for writers are fairly skewed based on the fact that we just, don't quite know what their day-to-day looks like. And every week we get to see cast members on stage and musical guests on stage, but the writers, we don't see them unless they make a cameo appearance. And then there's excitement. Usually there's excitement, when a cast member when a writer makes a cameo appearance. We're excited by that. It's something that's neat. Rosie is before that time though. And she's got a couple interesting things that might prevent her from entering the Hall of Fame. And that is the length of time to which we've waited to nominate her. And the fact that she's a writer, like I mentioned before. And it's going to be a tough sled, I think, to get her in. But if you're a fan, lobby, fight hard, go to social media and stick your head out the window and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore unless Rosie Shuster is in the SNL Hall of Fame. So there's that. Let's listen into her Hall of Fame sketch. At this point now, this is a sketch that I think a lot of people thought was reoccurring. I know I did. I believe, though, the character has only shown up twice and only once in a sketch that featured him. And that is Fred Garvin, male prostitute. Let's go to it now. This is Rosie Schuster on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast.
I'm coming.
Hello?
Mrs. Potter?
Yes, that's me.
The same Mrs. Potter who's vice president in charge of loans for the Franklin National Bank of Chicago?
Yeah, that's me.
Hey, this is for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
May I come in?
What for?
Well, you see, ma'am, when a VIP like yourself
Uh-huh.
comes to Moline to do business, it's customary for the company to send a gal up to the room. Compliments of Great Lakes Feed and Grain. And, well, since you're a gal, the company sent me, Fred Garvin, male prostitute.
I don't think you understand, Fred. I'm not that kind of girl.
Let me reassure you, ma'am. I can assure you professional hygiene, discretion, and animal gratification.
I have never had to pay for that in my whole life.
Well, don't worry about it. Great Lakes Feed and Grain is picking up the tab. You've got me for the whole night.
Hey,
Hay is for horses, young lady. No ifs, ands, and buts about it.
Mr.
You're
Garvin.
spending the night with Fred Garvin, male prostitute. Well, now, I have a work order here which specifies that I am to roger you roundly till 6:15 tomorrow morning.
Hey, wait a minute. Now, don't I get a say in this? I mean, maybe I want some sleep. Maybe I don't want to be rogered roundly.
Ma'am, you're dealing here with a fully qualified male strumpet. I service the entire Quad Cities area, Moline, Rock Island, Davenport, and Bettendorf. Why not give me a word? What have you got to lose?
What do I have to lose? No one's ever gonna know. And I'm not gonna see Paul for another couple of weeks.
He's not the most attractive guy in the world. But if he can make a living at this, he must be doing something right.
Okay, Mr. Garvin. I'll try.
Congratulations, Mrs. Potter. I knew you'd come to your senses. And now, ma'am, if you're amenable, I'd like to begin the session by striking a few seductive poses.
That's nice.
I call this one the snake. Fine then. If everything's going okay, you should be hotter than Billy by D. Be damned by now.
Well,
Mrs.
I don't
Potter,
know about
please
this.
cooperate.
I
Come
don't
on now,
really-
come on. You'll thank yourself later. Now, come on. Skedaddle into this bed here, young lady. Come on, come on. You just jump right in here.
Okay.
Now, if you don't mind, I do work with the glasses and jacket. Feeling anything yet? Any symptoms of arousal?
I don't think so.
Well, these things take time. Perhaps a bit of humor will break the ice. What's red and green and goes like this?
I don't know.
A frog in a blender. Here you go. And now look at this.
What's that?
My backseat driver's license. Enough foreplay. Let's get cracking.
Hey, wait a minute.
What?
What is all that stuff you got down there?
Oh, that's my rather elaborate network of trusses. I will need your help with a couple of these. I got the old hernia truss here. I got a spleen truss. It undoes with a couple of snaps at the back here. Go ahead.
No, I don't think I'm. I think this is too much for me.
No, it's just a couple of snaps at the back. You just got to make sure you don't touch the rupture. That's all.
Like that?
Yeah, at the back.
Ooh, I'm sorry. Oh. Who's that?
It's Slick.
Who's Slick?
Slick.
Your friend?
This takes a little explanation. You see, Slick is a gentleman of leisure. He looks out for me and the girls. Be there in a jiffy, Slick. By the way, one good word from you would really put me in good with the boss.
Okay, Fred. Okay.
Hey, Slick.
Fred, my man. I was down the hallway. I thought you might need some help with your trusses, baby.
Oh, no, we don't need any help with his stresses. In fact, I think maybe you both better get out of here.
What's the matter, lady? Hasn't Fred attended to your needs?
Oh, no, he's really attended to my needs. He was wonderful. The earth moved. In fact, it moved so much, I don't think I could take any more.
That's my Fred. Yeah, he's my bread and butter man. You see, in my stable, I got 8 girls and Fred. Come on, Fred, let's go, man. They got some hungry women down in Bettendorf waiting for the Garvin lizard.
Fred, I just want to thank you for tonight. I'm never going to forget it.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I do what I can. Because I'm Fred Garvin, male prostitute.
All right. Good stuff. That is a sketch, maybe a tad long, but I enjoyed it nevertheless. Rosie Shuster, everybody, give it up. And make sure to cast a vote for her when you get the chance in the SNL Hall of Fame balloting system. That's what I've got for you this week. I hope you're well. I want to thank Maddie Price on behalf of my colleagues, Matt Ardill and Thomas Senna. It's been a pleasure to be here with you this week, as it always is. Now, if you would do me a favor, and on your way out, as you pass the Weekend Update exhibit, there's a light switch on the wall. Turn it off, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNL HOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.